Space. The final frontier, as some guy with less hair than me said. Is there other life in the universe? Perhaps the greatest question we can ever hope to answer. Are we completely alone? Well, one of the ways that we might not be completely alone is if life was able to travel from certain primordial soups on one planet to another planet. This idea is called panspermia, the spreading of... you get it. But is that even a viable idea, though it's been in public consciousness for years? Well, to find out, we had to shoot some little bear boys out of an air cannon. And a lot of them died. Welcome to Office Hours. Man, that ship lands faster and faster these days. Hello, and welcome to Office Hours, a live component of the facility where good old Professor Kyle, as you can see, opens up his blast doors and allows you, members of the general public, and my beloved facility staff to come in for a couple hours while the doors are open, ask me any old questions, science-y, pop culture-y, hair-relatedly it may be, and I will do my best to educate and entertain. As you're in the chat, if you're watching live, please respect my security staff. They'll be watching you with a very well-trained eye and perhaps a laser turret or two. I will try to get to as many chats as possible while we're going through a number of topics each week, as we're wont to do. We'll be talking about launching tardigrades out of an air cannon for science. We'll be talking about the latest episode of the facility, Info Hazards, and we'll be talking about something amazing that we injected into some poor man's eye. He's fine now. And if you really, really, really want me to see what you want me to read or react to, you can try Super Chat on YouTube. I can't promise I'll get to all of it, but I'll try my very best. As always, we have Elizabeth Calvert coming in hot with the 50. It says, hey, Science Kyle, my tiny human Alex wants to know what other animals eat bamboo besides pandas. Well, only a few other animals, the bamboo lemur and the bamboo rat, and one of the reasons why there's so few animals, I think, is that the nutritional value of bamboo is so low. That's why pandas have to eat so dang much of it, and maybe that's why they fall out of trees so often, but there's no way to tell. Chris Sparks, again, as he's been doing every week for like the last 6 weeks, with a $500 donation. Chris, this opening segment about tardigrades is just for you. Kyle Nelson Fox with a 15. Say, hey, it's your favorite fox. Thanks for all the things. Hey, thanks to you. Thank you for being so foxy. Doug Nichols with a 10 says, first time simp for science, long time viewer. Thank you for all your amazing content, educational with tons of humor that doesn't detract from all the subject matter. Well, I'm definitely more sciencey than I am funny, that's for sure. Jay Twisted with the 50 says, hey Kyle, love the show. I was reading about a plan to start putting molten salt reactors in maritime vessels. What's the difference between molten salt reactors and regular nuclear reactors? I've done a little bit of research on molten salt reactors, and let's pause the super chats for just a second so we can get to our first topic. But one reason to use a molten salt reactor is that if you're generating heat from something like a nuclear reactor or a solar reactor out in the desert, if you're generating heat to make steam, you need to use that heat very quickly, right? Because heat dissipates and the thing will cool down. The water will cool down if you're trying to turn it into steam or what have you. So what molten salt reactors do is provide a reservoir in which the heat can linger. Molten salt will hang on to heat for a very long time. It'll stay hot for a very long time. And so there's a solar tower in the Nevada desert that does just this. It directs sunlight to a tower and it heats up molten salt, and the salt is so good at hanging on to heat that it can generate electricity from heating up water even at night when there's no sun. So the benefit of molten salt is hanging on to that heat for a long amount of time. Risuki with the 10 says, are all tardigrades Aquarius? Hashtag water bear, hashtag water bearer. That's a funny joke about something that's not real. Feral Beast with the 25 says, I'm no Chris Sparks, but here's my weekly Science Thor donation. Keep up the amazing work. Hey, any simp for science goes towards all the sciencey educational stuff that we do here at the facility. In fact, I'm taking my first trip in over a year to film and bring you something that I don't know if it happens anywhere else in the world, at least not anywhere else in the country. It's some very, very cool research, and let's just hope that I literally don't set myself on fire. The scientist told me that was a real possibility. No, I'm buying gloves. Let's get to our first topic. The water bear, the cutest of the microscopic creatures. If you're not familiar with the water bear is arguably the hardiest organism that we know of. It can survive the vacuum and radiation of space for at least 10 days, because we put them on the outside of the International Space Station just to test that. They can survive incredible pressures, incredible temperature swings, both hot and cold. They can go into a state of so-called cryptobiosis, and they can dehydrate themselves, like lose 99% of their water, go into a hibernative state called a TUN, T-U-N for whatever reason, and they can survive in that state almost dead for like 30 years, and then you put a drop of water on them, they're like, hey, what's up? Wait. Let me do that again. You can, they can be dehydrated, and then after 30 years, you can put a drop of water on them, and then they're like, or whatever they eat. I'm not totally sure, but they have an incredibly high tolerance for radiation, all these things. So they are the hardiest organism. I hope that voice actually worked. You'll let me know in a second. I'm sure. So these are some of the hardiest creatures that we know, and recent research shot these organisms. There we go. It did work. Okay. Recent research shot these organisms out of an air cannon. An air cannon is a basically like an air gun with a very, 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 very long barrel. And the advantage of an air gun with a very, 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 very high is that you can accelerate some projectile for a long time. So like having a gun, the barrel is very short in most cases, unless you're the Joker in 1989 Batman. You pull a very long revolver out of your pants because you're Jack Nicholson. But most gun barrels are very short, which means the acceleration that can be provided to the projectile by the expanding gases from the gunpowder exploding, you can't accelerate for very long. An air cannon can accelerate it for many, many feet or many, many meters, so it can get going very, very fast. How fast, Kyle? Oh, don't worry, baby birds, I'll feed you. It can get going... Happy Camper says, my dog is crying from your voice. Good. It can get going so fast you're in the kilometers per second range. Kilometers per second. So not even kilometers per hour, not even miles per hour, kilometers per second. Very, very, very high velocity. Kyle, why would you want to shoot water bears out of a cannon? Well, first you got to prepare them. What these researchers did in this new research, which I'll show you in a second, is freeze water bears and kept them frozen such that they entered that hibernative state that we mentioned before, that TUN state, to ensure that they were in their hardiest condition, the condition at which they would repel most other environmental factors. So they froze them, and they put them in a little canister called a sabot. And a sabot is just something you put around a projectile in a barrel to make it perfectly fit the barrel. So you can imagine like water bears at the center of this little package, and when the package comes out of the barrel, it separates, and the water bears fly out. So they put these frozen water bears in a sabot, and they fired it from an air cannon at 1 kilometer per second at different materials, like sand and metals and those kind of things. Now, Kyle, why would they do that? We're testing how likely it is that panspermia, as an idea, is something that's possible in the universe. Now, panspermia is the idea that if life evolved on one planetary body, say Earth or Mars or the Moon, that some sort of impact, or say life formed on an asteroid somehow, whatever. The idea is that life could hitch a ride on some material from one planet and make it to another planet, land on that planet, and then populate that planet. That's the idea of panspermia. So imagine an asteroid hitting Earth really, really hard. that forces ejecta, as it's called. A lot of rocks and materials. Say some water bears were in that material. Water bears float around in space for a while because they're super hardy, and then they land on a suitable planet and they populate that planet. That would be the idea of panspermia. And the attractiveness of this idea is that the attractiveness of this idea is that it increases the chances that other life could be in the universe. Because if it's easier to transfer life from one planet to another than we think it is, then chances go up. We wouldn't have to find just the needle in the haystack. Something might hit that needle, and then needles go everywhere in the haystack, right? So, all that being said, why we shot tardigrades out of a gun is to see, well, what is the hardiest organism that we know? If we fire the hardiest organism that we know at velocities that are similar to impact velocities on planetary bodies from ejecta and asteroids and meteorites and whatnot, if they can survive that, then there is some data to say that an animal or organism could be a part of panspermia. If tardigrades can survive that, then perhaps there's life in the universe that can make this idea more valid. So what do we see? Andres Lizano with the 5. Pura vida, Kyle. First time catching the show live. Keep doing what you're doing. You're changing the world for the best. Oh, wait till you see what we did to these water bears. Some of them are dead. So, this is the... Brandon Gentry says, with the 2, says, #casual science daddy. You're banned. Just kidding. Don't ban them. Send them to my OnlyFans page. So this is a figure from the research that we're talking about. In the top left corner, you can see an example tardigrade before testing. So in panel A there, about 100 micrometers, 100 micrometers wide, you have that little water bear, and it's entering its ton state. A and B, actually. So you can see they actually... they're of different sizes and different shapes and all that stuff. So A and B are showing you the tardigrades, frozen, ready for testing. They got little stuff in their bellies, apparently. They packed these in the sabot, fired it out of an air cannon at different velocities and impact materials, like sand and metal, as we said. And panel C, far left there, showing you a tardigrade recovered after an impact of 0.7 kilometers per second. Incredibly, incredibly fast. D is showing you just a tardigrade fragment after being shot at about 1 kilometer per second. So, there is a limit to the survival prowess of the tardigrade. You can see here in figures, figure A here, the survival rate percentage on the y-axis versus impact speed. And you can see that as the impact speed goes up, the survival rate goes almost down to 0, which is to say that around and above 1 kilometer per second impact speed, tardigrades just get tardigone. They get destroyed. We'll get back to that. Something I'm realizing as I'm looking at this graph, this means that the survival rate at 0.5 kilometers per second is 100%, near 100%. So even though there's a drop off when you double it, still at half a kilometer per second, these are still surviving at near 100% rate, and that's just doing a quick bit of math there. That's over 1,000 miles per hour. So tardigrades, I'm not taking anything away from them. They can survive impact speeds of well over 1,000 miles per hour. So they are still incredibly hardy. They're incredibly Tom Hardy. But there is a limit. Now, this limit is very important. Why? Because at around 1 kilometer per second, that's starting to enter into the impact speeds, which you will find ejecta and asteroids and meteorites falling onto planetary bodies. Which does mean that using the hardiest creature... Sorry, I'm reading the study here. The hardiest creature that we know of can't survive high velocity impacts like you might find impacting another body, say from the Earth to Mars, or from the Moon to Earth. So I'm reading from the study verbatim now. When considering the implications for successful transfer of tardigrades or similar organisms across space, panspermia, the low shock pressure required, down there on that side of the graph, the low shock pressure required rules out most of the common scenarios of interplanetary transfer that involve impact speeds well above 1 kilometer per second and pressures in the billions of pascals. However, there are niche environments where such transfers may be possible. These include transfers from planetary surfaces to nearby moons, like from the moon of Earth to Earth, or from Phobos and Deimos and Mars to Mars. So that's quoting the study itself. So this is kind of a plus and a minus to the panspermia idea, right? If tardigrades can't survive very common impact pressures and velocities, then it's unlikely that any other organism like a tardigrade, a complicated organism. So this is different than something like bacteria or viruses, which are single cells or don't even have a cell. In the case of viruses, tardigrades are complicated little things. They're complex life, defined by, how many cells they have, multicellular life. And if they can't survive these common impacts, and it's unlikely that anything else is going to follow what panspermia as an idea suggests. Like the study itself says, though, it's not unthinkable that something like a tardigrade could survive a trip from the moon to Earth if it was ejected from the moon. But this is slight evidence against panspermia as a real idea that could populate life throughout the universe from a single wellspring of life, or something like that. But again, tardigrades are still incredibly, incredibly Tom Hardy. Don't shoot animals out of cannons. We have Will Holtz with the 10. Says, on a similar note, how effective would a very tiny Gatling gun that fires tardigrades be in the hands of a jumping spider? I don't know if I'd want to get hit by anything moving 1 kilometer per second, but the mass of one tardigrade is so low that I'd be willing to stand in front of a tardigrade minigun. You can quote me on that. Will Geddes, wild guess with the 20, says, my fiance is autistic and I really appreciated your video on and in support of autism and ASD. Thanks for all you do. Simping ain't easy, but it sure is fun. Thank you, wild guess. I'm actually getting more and more involved with the ASD community. I'll be doing a internal talk at a company about accommodating ASD in the workplace and stuff like that on Thursday. So we're getting more and more involved. We want to do some good work while we can. Thank you for that. Chichola, as usual, with a 30.99 says, "G'day, Kyle. Do humans have an actual first contact protocol, like a pamphlet of things to say if you meet an alien? And what do you think is the weirdest part of humanity that we'll have to explain to them? Cheers, you legend." I'm sure governments have some sort of... at least someone has a classified first contact protocol. I'm sure someone in the Pentagon has been paid to think about that. But I've only seen, like, meme infographics, so I don't know if there's an actual first contact protocol. So that would be... Sorry, I feel like my beard is not symmetrical at the moment. Okay. I don't know of one, but I'm sure someone has it. What would be the weirdest part of humanity to have to explain to them? That depends entirely on how the aliens function. Do they have a society like ours? Yada, yada, yada. So it's impossible to say without knowing more about the aliens themselves. The Horse Leaves Cabbage, the 24.99, says, "Hey Kyle, love the Kyle. This talk of tardigrades reminds me of something I recently learned about the baroscale of advanced civilizations, but instead of Dyson spheres, it's a mastery of the very small." Oh, I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to look into that. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, part of something that would signify a very, very advanced society would be the mastery over the very small, as you say. if we met an alien species that could completely take apart, reshape, change things at the molecular, the nanoscale, the atomic level, then that would be very, very advanced indeed. I mean, that's when you're getting into like 3D printers that mimic, Star Trek replicators and stuff like that. So yeah, that would be a good sign of that. Joshua Roby with a 10 says, "Hey, love the Kyle show." I thought that wasn't going to make sense, but it did. Is it feasible that waterbenders in Avatar: The Last Airbender freeze water instantly by slowing the atoms therein? And wouldn't it create an expanding heat wave from all the escaping heat? The problem with freeze powers is that if you freeze something, all that heat has to go somewhere. You don't realize that because when you put something in your refrigerator, the heat transfer is pretty slow, and there's circulating air and stuff like that that's removing heat. But if you remove heat, and that process happens slowly, but if you're removing heat very quickly, like turning into Iceman, yes, you would have a blast of heat or some heat sink attached to them. That would have to be very, very good. Olasanera with the Australian $50 says, "Finally wrapped up my work week, and I'ma celebrate by simping for science. Hope everyone is doing well. Love all y'all." Thank you, Olasanera. That was a perfect Australian accent, and it's getting even better. Nerdy Loki with the Australian 10. A lot of love from Australia today. I like that. I want to go to Australia so bad. I want to... Well, this is more of a personal thing, but I want to build an undersea bunker near the Great Barrier Reef and walk into the ocean and never come back. Nerdy Loki, the 20, says, "With all advances in technology, including shooting things into space and at high speeds, how far off are we from Geth-like AI with individual shells being little more than an interface for the central intelligence?" And let's pause the super chats for a second so we can get to the next topic, which I forget what it is already. It's fine. No, we're chatting. It's fine. What? What'd you say? Oh, how close are we to Geth-like AI? Well, I think very far. To have shells that could harbor a central intelligence, something like the Borg, you would need general artificial intelligence in the first place. And right now, we're nowhere near that. We're not even like human level artificial intelligence. Well, general intelligence is human level artificial intelligence, but we're not very far past narrow AI, which is like your phone, or Alexa, order more toilet paper. Alexa, play Yakety Sax. We're not that far from that. So, general AI like you'd need for something like the Geth is way far off. If ever. I don't know. D.W. Jones with the 1001 says, "Tangential to your upcoming journey, might there be rock climbing near this location? Hashtag Sim for Science." If any of you are rock climbers, you'll know my plight. A couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or two now, I blew a pulley in my middle finger here. So little anatomy lesson for you non-rock climber types. How you're able to do this is that a tendon runs on the underside of your finger, and it's attached to the very end here. So when you activate that tendon, you pull it down, it pulls like that. It pulls the finger down, and your joints allow it to make this motion. You can make a quick anatomical model of a hand with just some motorcycle chain or bicycle chain and put a rubber band there and have it do this. So that's how it works. But to stay rigidly attached to your finger, this tendon has little rubber bands around it, little biological rubber bands around it that look like this. There's 3 of them, A4, A3, A2, or the other way around, I forget. But these little biological rubber bands are also material, and they're called pulleys. So you have 3 pulleys on your finger that hold your tendons against your finger such that you can do this really well. Now, when I was rock climbing a couple weeks ago, one of these snapped, which is bad. So it's actually the 3rd time that's happened to me. So I haven't been rock climbing in a little bit. I'm getting old enough and heavy enough that I don't know if getting back into real rock climbing shape is something that I'm going to be able to do. But I love rock climbing so much that I'll probably try it again and see if I can get back into some kind of shape. I was climbing really, really hard before lockdown, and so I was angry. It's my fault that I got injured, really. I mean, I put on lockdown weight, and then it's been a year since I was climbing, so I wasn't, I didn't have all the fitness levels that I wanted. I tried to do something that was too hard too soon, and my finger snapped. And it sounds like this too. You're holding on something really hard, and you hear like this. Oh, uh-oh. It doesn't hurt because there's no nociceptors, there's no pain receptors in your pulley there, so it doesn't hurt. There's some inflammation and stuff. But yeah, it means you can't weight. You shouldn't put weight on this finger. Now I can. I can actually put weight on that finger, which is good. But at the time, I definitely couldn't. And that was bad. But I'll probably get back into it. I love rock climbing. It's an individual sport, and it has numbers associated with it, so you can see yourself getting better. Oh, I did a V1 yesterday, but V2 today. I'm getting better. Keeps you in good shape. So I'll try to get back to it. But it's still going to take a couple more weeks. I'm going through some rehab, and I have what's called power putty. It's basically like a silly putty of different densities, and you work up with the different densities, slowly working the finger and getting the tendon healed back up like that. We have Maxim Holodillin with a 150 symbol money. Oh, it's the Kyle Show. Hi, love from Israel. Hello. Well, that's what that money is, huh? That's what that symbol is, huh? Well, thank all the way from Israel. Thank you so much for being here, being inside the chat, chewing bacco. I get it. It says, first time catching a live show. What's up? Well, we were just talking about why we shoot little animals out of cannons, and now we're going to talk about something that you were talking about when I was talking about it last week. Peer review. So as we're wont to do on every episode of the facility, I go back and look at some of your best comments, questions, and corrections from that episode. We highlight it. Actually, recently we've been kind of going through a bunch of them, but we highlight it, and then I make you an honorary member of the facility, and then Kevin gets you a plaque. It's a very rigid process. So last week we at the facility we were talking about info hazards. The idea that not all knowledge is good. Some knowledge can be actively harmful, either knowing it or telling it to people or making it available to people. Excuse me, a good example of that, or an easy example of that, would be if government physicists published a how to make a nuclear bomb PDF and distributed it everywhere. Or gave it directly to, our enemies or enemies. That constitutes an info hazard, right? Information that could potentially harm people, and a lot of people at that. And so I wanted to do this episode because I'd been thinking about it, especially in the context of synthetic pandemics. And I kind of wanted to shake you out of the idea that all knowledge is good. And many of you had many good comments about this. Chuck Shuck, top comment right now on the channel, says, a good example of an info hazard is when the people at Mythbusters tried to disprove that you could make a bomb with household items, but then prove that you could and couldn't air the episode. Yeah, oh, Ash, a lot of people lurking. Hey, lurkers. So I've talked, this is going to sound like a flex, but that's because it is. I've talked to Adam Savage personally about some of these, and there's more than he's even talked publicly about. There was a number of Mythbusters things that they started to look into or wanted to look into and knew they definitely couldn't, or were warned off of it by like the FBI. So those are info hazards, right? One that he's mentioned publicly, so it's fine for me to say, is they were testing whether or not you could make like household silencers for handguns. And once they started looking into it, they realized this is something they couldn't tell people. Because, and he says it that way, but how we would say it in the context of some philosophical idea about knowledge, we'd say that this telling people how to make a silencer at home constitutes an info hazard. And so we wouldn't want to do that, right? Great Green Goo said the first time I heard of this concept of infohazard was with the memetics with the SCP Foundation, and the concept completely fascinated me. Yeah, so funny thing, I had no idea what SCP was when I returned to the facility after leaving the Emotionless Void. It just so happens that I run my facility in a similar way, apparently. But SCP ideas come out of this philosophical idea of info hazards and cogito hazards, SCP calls them. Ideas that are harmful just to know them, harmful to you psychologically. And there's been a lot of that in science and science fiction. Ava Porter says, can you say hi, Ava? Hi, Ava. There's been a lot of cogito hazards in the public, in popular culture, for a long time. Like in the first season of True Detective, The King in Yellow, The Yellow King is based off of a book that said, if you read that, you would go crazy. The Elder Scrolls in Skyrim are like that. You can't read them or else you'll go crazy and you'll have too much knowledge and your brain will explode, or whatever that game said. So this is a known thing. And it's an interesting idea because, again, we have this knowledge bias. Dr. Horseleech says, I find it ironic that you were talking about distraction hazards while all I could think about was when you had ghost hair in that one shot. Look, I can't control everything that the main does. If it wants to disappear, it just does. It's like Harry Potter trying to find whatever happened in that movie while he was... Look, I haven't seen the films in a long time. You know what? I'm gonna go with it. I mean, it's pretty cliche, but I'm gonna give this week's peer review to Chuck Shuck, who's talking about Mythbusters actually running into info hazards and having to negotiate whether more knowledge is better for the public, and with a public science show. And so, Chuck Shuck, for making me remember those fond memories. You are now an honorary member of the facility. Fantastic. Fantastic. Kevin, you got the plaque, right? It's up. It's on the shelf. It's not a plaque. This is a signed card of me being involved with the... Yeah, I know it's a lot. Well, if I can't flex in front of them, who am I going to flex in front of? We have Brian Murray with the 25. He says, hey, Kyle, love the show. Hey, thank you. Can't watch this whole thing live, but I watch every VOD, so here's to you. Thanks for reigniting my love of science when I was in a bad spot. Brian, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for supporting us and what we do here. And that's exactly what I want to do. If I can reignite your interest in science or get you interested in something, or just broaden your perspective on things, that's the best I could ever hope to do. And you humble me and everyone here at the facility, even though I don't really see anyone around here. Javier says, when did you have that photo shoot in that thing you were flexing on us with, Kyle? That was 2016, so 5 years ago. And you can tell that I've aged 5 years, probably even more. Oh, that photo shoot that I was showing you in the rain room. Yeah, not too far from the facility, there is a photo studio in one of the rooms in the studio. If you go to a really cool photo studio, many of you probably haven't been to a photo studio before, but and really nice ones, say, if I happen to be in California, which I won't admit, but really nice photo studios have different rooms that you can rent, and each one of those rooms has a different theme or a different set of tools or apparati, like cool laser lights, or it looks industrial and there's an old motorcycle in the background, or in the case of this one, it was a rain room. And it has temperature-controlled rain that falls from the ceiling, and it has lights and different backdrops and stuff. And so I was there with Aria, who was getting her motherboard cleaned by the water. You can do it. It's fine. And I couldn't resist. I had to get in there. And then my brother, Loki, he showed up, and he poked me with a knife, and I fell over. Thomas Hadrick with the 20, as usual. Use this to buy yourself some beard oil and keep that beard game strong. Symmetry is important. Also, crypto tardy boys are a ton of fun. Science is my passion. That was a bad joke. Jay of Legends with the 50 says, Kyle, silencers aren't a thing for weapons. It's a suppressor. They're still loud. One only reason it would be a bad idea is it's an NFA item. The government illegally prohibits it. It seems like a weird... Illegally prohibits it? You mean prohibits it. And you'd be asking for trouble from the ATF by making one without paying the $200 anti-gang fee. Well, you said a lot of things there that I didn't even know were things. There's an anti-gang fee you have to pay? Yes, I do know that silencers are nothing like video game or Hollywood silencers. They don't make a gun sound like pew pew. There's still a lot of hot gas coming out of a gun, and it just makes it quieter. But it would still, you wouldn't want to fire it near your head. You could still, damage your hearing, even with a so-called silencer on it. It is more accurately called a suppressor. I get it. Thank you. Did you pay the anti-gang fee before making that comment? Parker Brilliant. Who? Is that your real last name? Because Parker Brilliant sounds like a Jimmy Neutron kind of character. I like that. Hey, Kyle, love the show. My friend Jeff recently enlightened me to the ways of the bestagon, the hexagon. What's your favorite polygon? Sorry, I didn't see your earlier message. You just... Okay, I don't want to sound mean, but you just learned what a hexagon is? That's fine. Hey, that's cool. What's my favorite polygon? I like a good triangle. I'm a triangle man. Zach Stover with a 10 says, hey Kyle, could an organic railgun be evolved by an aquatic animal using the electromotive force you mentioned from your Mass Effect playthrough? Go watch that if you haven't yet, back on Twitch. And an electric eel's ability to generate electricity. Well, there's a lot of... So the problem with trying to say if something in evolution is possible is that it depends, as we said before on this show, on the environmental pressures involved. So would an animal evolve wings? Would it evolve some sort of weapon or defense mechanism or what have you? That's entirely dependent on the environmental pressures and the randomness of evolution. The driving force of evolution is completely random mutation. And some of those mutations are selected or not. So could an animal evolve some sort of organic railgun? I don't know. It seems a little complicated because every time something evolves, evolution's only working with what is already available to it, and it takes a lot of... Evolution is a give and take, right? If there's a lot of resources so-called resources being spent on something that's very complicated, something else suffers. And so it's hard to evolve very, very complicated, intricate systems by chance and selected for by nature, which is why we don't see something like a gun. And I might just be totally talking out of my butt here, but this is leading me to say that there are creatures that do have kind of projectile motion or projectile-like defense and offensive capabilities. So the tongue of a chameleon is kind of loaded in that it kind of fires a projectile in this kind of way. the club of a mantis shrimp locks itself in place using its own muscles and materials in those muscles to lock it into place and store a lot of elastic potential energy and then release it all at once. But to make like a gun, I don't think so. Oh, and people are way ahead of me. Mantis shrimp, pistol shrimp, swordfish. Yeah. So something as complicated as that, I don't know. I'm not a biologist, but it seems very unlikely to me. It took millions and millions and millions of years for electric eels to even be a thing, right? Adam Frost with the New Zealand 1699. Hey, Kyle, why do you reckon it took so long in evolution to get human-level intelligence? Seems like there's heaps of examples of convergent evolution for other things, so why not smart boys earlier? Again, it's happenstance, right? It's not... The first thing, one of the big things to know about evolution is it's not trying to get to some goal. There is no end point, and there's no like ultimate evolution, which is to say that not every animal is going to evolve to be intelligent. As long as you are passing on your genes, and those genes keep being passed on, you're being successful in the eyes of nature. And so you can be as dumb as a sponge, a sea sponge on the bottom of the seafloor, and you're just as evolutionarily successful as anything else. It just happens to be that when intelligence evolved in our ancestors, and there is intelligent, you said convergent evolution, but other creatures are intelligent. They're just not as intelligent as us, as we define it. It just so happened that human intelligence allowed us to human intelligence combined with our social intelligence and evolution allowed us to leapfrog into technology and shape the entire planet. And that gives you... It's easy for that to bias you, to say like, well, that must be the best form of creature. But it's not. I mean, if we were under different environmental pressures, maybe being intelligent and being hairless primates wouldn't be good, right? In some environments, we want to be more like the water bear, and then maybe in those environments, like ultra high pressure and temperature, maybe intelligence would never evolve, and we wouldn't need it. So why no smart boys earlier, Adam says. Well, like I said at the beginning, happenstance, right? Random mutations. And then once some sort of intelligence became selected for, because those creatures could do different things, pass on those genes that had the makings of intelligence, those creatures could pass on those genes more frequently than other creatures that didn't have those genes. And then evolution selected for intelligence more and more and more and more. And now there's us. But again, intelligence is not what evolution is working towards in every creature. A slug is as evolved as you. And in some cases where people refuse to wear masks in supermarkets, a slug is more evolved than those people. Got him. Finally, last topic. I want to talk about injecting someone in the face with stuff. This man that you see in this picture here has been blind for 50 years. I'm letting that sink in, apparently. This guy has been blind for 50 years. And what he is wearing is something to get an idea of his brain activity, but then also these goggles, these Geordie LaForge kind of goggles. And what these goggles are doing are flashing lights on his eyes. Why would they be doing that if he is blind? Well, what new research... I should show you this. What new research... Partial recovery of visual function in a blind patient after optogenetic therapy. What this man had done to his eye is that researchers took genes. Let's start there. So there are algae that have genes that allow that algae to be light sensitive. That is to say, these genes code for proteins that when they're in the presence of light, it allows the algae to move towards or away from sources of light. So researchers took this gene, which codes for the crimson R protein. They took these genes and they wanted to see if this could help blind people. And this is through the process of so-called optogenetics, genetic therapy for opto, seeing stuff. And this is the first person in the world to ever benefit from this. And I say benefit because the researchers took this gene from an algae that allowed it to sense light, put it inside of a virus, an empty virus, a benign virus, what researchers would call a vector. Now, vectors are ways to deliver genes into a cell. And we use viruses because viruses are very, very good at that. What viruses do, their whole game plan in life, is to latch onto one of your cells and then inject some of their genetic material into your cell. And then your cell will be like, hey, look, genetic material, let's follow the instructions. In the case of a bad virus, those instructions are make more viruses. And then your cells do, and then you get a viral infection and blah, 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 blah. But in the case of a viral vector, we put the genes that we want your cells to make into a harmless virus, and then we put it in an area of your body through an injection. And then those viruses do what viruses do best. They find your cells and they inject that information, that genetic information that we want to have read by your cells. It enters the cells and it makes the proteins that we want. So in this case, here we go. So in this case, the researchers took this light sensing gene, they put it into viruses, and then they injected those viruses into one of the man's eye with a needle. I know that sounds bad, but guess what it did? So those viruses went into the retinal cells at the back of this man's eye where you sense light and color and all that other stuff. And those viruses injected this algae protein into the retinal cells in the back of this man's eye. And then the back of this man's eye, the cells there, started making this protein that's able to respond or able to indicate a response to light. And then amazingly, the human brain started recognizing light again. And they tested this with, as you see, electrodes, see what's going on in his brain. This is very specific to this one experimental setup. They didn't just inject him and then have him look at stuff. No. Instead, so that they could perfectly control the experimental setup, they put these goggles on him. And what these goggles did was took light information from the surroundings. It's like a VR headset, really. It took the picture of the surroundings and then it mapped it onto a 2D image and then projected that into his eyes. So in this way, the researchers could precisely control exactly what this man was seeing or not. And so by giving him some stimulus, like, okay, this is a picture of a notebook on a table, for example. Can you tell us where it is? Or he's looking at a cup in this example, and then he's using the experimental setup, these knobs and such. Touch if you can see this thing, how far it is away, blah, 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 blah. They use this in this setup, and he was able, more often than not, to tell them what was on the table and where. This is the first person to benefit from optogenetics. We injected algae genetic material into the back of someone's eye, and they were able to see again. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Kyle, why is your hair jiggling so much? It's because I'm drawn like those old cartoons. I know what some of you are thinking. But Kyle, I'm scared of genetic modification. Yes, okay. But in examples such as this, we can use what we know about how DNA and RNA and genes work in other creatures and use it to our benefit. They restored partial sight to this man who has been blind for 50 years. Obviously, there are a lot of ethical pitfalls here, but I think it is my opinion that if we can look to nature and apply genetics in a ethical and smart way, then we could reduce a lot of suffering in the world. And I think that's a net benefit and not a net benning. It's pretty cool. You like that Annette Bening joke? Oh, I should say that he didn't get his sight back immediately either. I mean, it wasn't just, oh, I mean, there's an actual metabolism at work, right? Your eyes need to, the viruses need to actually inject that material. Your cells need to read that material, make the proteins, your cell has to express those genes, read those genes, then make the proteins. So it didn't happen immediately, but it did happen. We have Wanderer with the 20, whose avatar is Majora's Mask, which I appreciate, which is my favorite Zelda game. Don't mind me, just simping for science. You know what? I appreciate it. And I appreciate you for knowing what possibly the best Zelda game is. Breath of the Wild's close. Ryan Radford with the 20 says, why are we trying to kill something that's so dang cute? Asking for a friend. Because we wanted to see whether or not they could survive the kinds of impacts that a creature would have to survive if panspermia was a viable way to transmit life across the universe. And they died. Cameron with the $50 donation says, hey Kyle, what is the most scientifically supported origin for life? We know how life progressed. Evolution is a rigorously tested theory with mountains of evidence. We would have to be very, very wrong about the universe for evolution to be incorrect at this point. We would need a mountain, perhaps even a literal mountain of papers to overturn evolution at this point. Biology does not make sense without evolution. So we know how life progressed. But what we don't know for sure is how life began. And from experiments, so one idea that's been around forever is the primordial soup. And so we know that in early Earth's oceans, there was a lot of different chemicals floating around. And so we've done experiments where we put a lot of chemicals in a solution like water, and we zap it with like the equivalent of a lightning strike. And we have seen the beginnings of spontaneous atoms and molecules coming together. And what we're really looking for is some self-replicating system, a collection of molecules. And that's what DNA is. DNA is just a way, it's a self-replicating compound. All DNA is trying to do is replicate itself. And we are very complicated DNA replicators. That's what we do. But I think current research has seen hints, if not outright confirmation, of the possibility of spontaneously forming self-replicating molecules. And so that's the idea that I know of. That's the most popular, is that early Earth oceans, a lot of elements and compounds and organic compounds floating around, some sort of energetic event started or led to self-replicating molecules. And then life proceeds from there by trial and error. You can call it evolution too. Maliko with the $5. Maliko Muchimba. Ooh, I like saying that. With the 5 says, what do you want to see happen in science over the next 5 years? Huh. That's a good question. I don't know why this is the first thing that I thought of. Okay, so here's the second thing that I thought of. Health is such a complicated thing that you can sell people stuff that doesn't work. That's how complicated health is. And they'll buy it by the billions of dollars. And I'm talking a lot about like supplements and stuff. I would love to get a better handle on our microbiome the bacterial flora and fauna that live inside of us, in our guts, get a better handle on that, and then be really there's hair in my face. Be really able to start narrowing down on probiotics and antibiotics that really take advantage of the knowledge of your microbiome, such that we can really start helping people, given how much we know about how the microbiome might or does affect your general health, from weight gain to diabetes to all these other things. And I said that thing in the beginning because there's a lot of stuff on the market that just doesn't work or is not actually efficacious, and we need to get a handle on that as we learn more and more about how the body works. That was kind of a rambling answer, but that's what I want. JF Legends with the 10, your message was deleted. That's what happens. That's what happens when you mess when you mess with security. You might get shot out of a tardigrade cannon. That one dude says essential oils, more like snake oils. If essential oils were essential, they'd have the things that you actually need in them. Tangentially, most of you, because most of you watching can afford whatever you're watching on, and you're interested in sciencey things, most of you are probably fine nutritionally. By which I mean you don't need a multivitamin. Most people don't need multivitamins. If you're seriously malnourished, if you're pregnant and recommended to take them by your doctor, yes. But most people don't need multivitamins. Even something that you don't think has a lot of nutrients in it, like, say, a McDonald's hamburger, still has the amino acids and materials and elements in them, compounds in them, that contribute to your general health. You're not lacking in your nutrition most of the time. Now, that's different from if you're trying to, lose weight or be really healthy, that kind of thing. But for a general don't die kind of health, most of you are getting what you need because the iron and the salts and the sugars and all that. Most of you are getting what you need. So the multivitamin industry is a grand scheme perpetuated on already healthy people. The people who are most likely to take multivitamins, in my experience, are the people who are already the most healthy people, right? They don't need them. They're turning their pee expensive by taking multivitamins. They don't need them. So that's connected in my head to essential oils, because multivitamins and supplements offer you the idea that you're not getting what you need. You're not getting the essentials. But you are. That's why you're not dead. Most people don't need vitamins. Paranormal Phenomena says, Kyle! What? You don't exist. You anime ghost? Just a couple more comments and questions. Space Rat says, I really like tardigrades and cats. Why are you trying to kill them? I'm not doing it. I didn't shoot nothing out of a cannon. But would I, for science? Yes. Not cats, though. I have a couple of those. I wouldn't do that. You bring that up, and it makes me think of something else. If we have an idea that we can kind of support with evidence that suffering and pain, the experience of pain, is linked to some amount of complexity in the nervous system and in a brain, if a creature has one. If we can connect those two things, then it follows that some creatures can suffer and some probably can't. And so based on the complexity of the tardigrade, we could, I'm speculating, but based on the complexity of the tardigrade, we can probably say that it doesn't suffer or feel pain or experience pain in the way that you do. And so shooting a tardigrade out of a cannon isn't as ethically problematic as shooting a cat out of a cannon, which we know can experience pain and feel pain in the way that you can, or like the way that you can. And so getting a IRB, as scientists call it, or an institutional review board, to sign on to you destroying an animal like a tardigrade, it would be easier, right? Because based on the complexity of the organism, it's not going to feel pain in the same way that you do, or we suspect that. And as always, at the end of our facility stream, we have Music Central Piano 29 with the $50 donation. Keep up the great work, Kyle. Evolution is amazing with a pretty simple system. If you can reproduce, given some environmental stressors, you and your lineage pass the test of survival. Stay safe, stay rational. I'm not going to fire any cats out of a cannon. Thank you so much for all of you for joining me for this episode of Office Hours. We talked about shooting creatures out of cannons for science, because they probably can't feel pain, to give evidence or not to the idea of panspermia. We talked about info hazards, and we made someone who mentioned Mythbusters to me. Kevin, what was their name? You got to write it down. I can't. Made them an honorary member of the facility. And we talked about how to use algae proteins to make blind people see again. Thank you so much for joining me. As I said, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. This week at the facility, we are talking about, I want to introduce you to a way that you can I'm going to tell you how to estimate anything, or how to give you a mental process and way of thinking that will help you estimate very complicated things very quickly. And next week, because as I mentioned, I'll be traveling, capturing something on camera that will be very awesome for you, and I will show you soon. But next week there will be no office hours. But maybe we'll play some Resident Evil or some Subnautica this week, if there's time. I got a lot to do. I'm researching cryptocurrency and all this crap. Have a great rest of your week. If you want to continue on this conversation after this stream is over, you can go to patreon.com/Kyle Hill, join our Discord, talk with me almost every day. But I always be lurking. You can get private members only live streams like we'll have this week at the facility, which is just a few dozen people. You can ask me any old personal or business related thing. And you get behind the scenes photos, you get videos early. It's great. Trust me. I have your best intentions in mind. Until next week, be nice to each other, because this is all we got.